Next, we're going to take a look at some word problems that go with absolute value in lesson 2.2. So students were just working on the basic skills on the other side of this worksheet the other day, and we really want to take a look beyond that to the word problems. So again, this comes from lesson 2.2, absolute value. This is homework number 4, which we just started the other day, and we're talking about the distance from 0 on a number line. So in a minute, we're going to take a look at this really challenging problem, number 18. But let's get started first with something that I think students are pretty prepared for. It is problem number 16 on the front page. It's just here at the bottom. And again, this wasn't assigned the other day. We're going to work on this in class when I see students next. I just want to give you a heads up that something like this would appear on the test. It's quite likely that they would see this. So we want them to be thinking about it and kind of be prepared for that idea. So for number 16 here, it says answer the questions. Notice it's a word problem, so in a minute we want to give them words back. I talk to students a lot about trying to keep the same form, meaning if they give me fractions, I try to answer in fraction form. If they give me decimals, I try to give them decimals back or answer in decimal form. So when they give me words, I give them words back. If I say good morning to a student in the morning, I sure hope they say good morning to me. Number 16. Two numbers have an absolute value of 37. I just read something really important. It says two numbers have this absolute value of 37. Two numbers. I might even put a 2 above that so that I remember there are two numbers. Which of the two numbers is farther jumps out at me, from 1 on the number line? Well, this is interesting. It's not farther from 0, which really would be talking about absolute value. It says which is farther from 1. So in a minute, I move from this idea of two numbers that are equally the same distance away from 0 on the number line to decide which of those numbers is farther from 1. Well, my suggestion here to students was to sketch a number line. So we really want to take a look at how to do that. And there's room for a horizontal number line here, so I think that probably makes the most sense at this point. So on my number line, we often will show the neutral number that separates my positives from my negatives. What number am I talking about? 0. So we have 0 here to split our positives from negatives. Which way do we move for positives? To the right. Which way do we have to move for negatives? To the left. So here I have my basic number line set up for you. Now it says two numbers have an absolute value of 37. Well, that really means a distance of 37 from 0. So if I started at 0 and I started counting 37 units to the right, I can picture if I jumped 1 unit, I'd be at 1, or 2 units, I'd be at 2, or for my third interval, I'd be at 3, and that would keep continuing. So if I take 37 jumps, I hope you realize that we would land at a positive 37. 37 has an absolute value of 37 from 0. So this is a distance of 37 away, 37 units or intervals. Well, it says there's a second number that has the same thing. How is that possible? Well, maybe instead of jumping to the right towards the positives, I could jump to the left towards the negatives. Well, if I did that, if I jumped 1 unit back, I'd be at -1, and another unit back, I'd be at -2, and a third interval back, I'd be at -3, and so on. So I could really envision that if I kept moving this direction, I might one day get to -37, and I know that that would take me 37 jumps or hops to get there. 37 units. Well, my number line looks pretty awesome, but we can't forget this next piece. It says, which of those two numbers is farther, not from 0, but from 1 on the number line? I don't even have 1 on my number line yet. That might be an important thing to include. So where would we find 1 on this number line? Well, I know 1 is greater than 0, so it must be to the right. I'm heading towards the positives, but I'm not very far along the number line, so I'll keep it pretty close. I'll give it a point, and I will label it 1. Again, they're asking me to consider the distance from each of these numbers to 1. So I'm going to kind of draw myself a little bracket here and show that for the first one, I'm going from 1 to 37. Well, notice these are on the same side of 0. So I really want to find their difference, or maybe subtract. So we've looked at a math map before that kind of shows us this skill. We really, when we run into numbers on the same side of the number line, both positives or both negatives, to find their distance, we subtract. I'm really taking 37, take away 1. Well, what would that be? How many units away must this 37 be from 1? Well, just 36 units or 36 jumps or even intervals. Well, now we have to try that with our other number here. Notice negative 37 has to go all the way this way to get to 1. Well, I know that it would be just 37 units to get back to 0, but it looks like I had to go a little bit farther. Notice that I have a negative and I'm moving to the positives. The two numbers I'm talking about are on opposite sides of 0. When that happens, if we think back to our math map, that really means that I have to add those two quantities. But I have to treat this negative 37 like an absolute value. In a minute, I have to talk about his distance and add that distance of 1 more. That's just to kind of prevent that negative from getting in the way. So how far away is negative 37 on the number line? 37. And if I add the distance to 1, that would be 1 more unit. 37 plus 1 more gets me 38. Well, if I compare this 38 to this 36, I can definitely tell who's farther. 38 is farther than 36. But that wasn't really the question. They didn't ask me to write an inequality as 38 greater than or less than 36. They said, which of these numbers has the farther distance? Well, what number is it that got me this farther distance of 38? Go back and look at your number line. It looks like negative 37 is farther from 1 than positive 37. And that makes sense to me because they'd be the same distance from 0, but I bumped the finish line closer to 37, which is on the positive side. So it must be farther from negative 37. Again, we're supposed to answer in word form here. They gave me words. We'll give them words back. We have a little bit of room down here. So let's say negative 37 is farther from not 0, but 1 on the number line. I see I broke another rule in math. And when it comes to writing, I started with a number in number form, and I really should have started with word form. If I was going to start with a number, I should have written out the negative, or the word negative at least. Well, this is the general idea. I'm sure some of you out there can make that a little bit better. The next word problem, the challenge of all challenges, is really number 18. There are lots of pieces to this. So we might say there are helicopters, birds, divers, and submarines, oh my, and we have to figure out what to do with them. So in number 18, we're going to read this problem and we're going to set up a number line to try to get ourselves started. So if we take a quick peek, we're going to just read this in chunks and see if we can decode a little bit together. So it says a helicopter is flying at 155 meters above sea level. Oh, I can picture that. I've seen a helicopter flying before. Helicopter. It's 155 meters above sea level. Well, above really reminds me of a positive integer or positive number. So I know on my number line over here, I'm going to want to put that in a positive location. I don't know how well this is going to show up. I might have made my number line a little too huge. Let's see how it works. Not too well. They don't teach you this in teacher school. At least they didn't when I went through school. How can I get a better vision for you here? All right, let's try this. So if you take a look, I really want you to make a vertical number line. We're talking about above sea level and below sea level. So I have a giant vertical number line here. You can't even see all of it. I made it so big. You'll want to sketch one too on the side of your paper over here where it says show all your work. So I know I'm comparing everything to sea level. Really, that's where the water meets the land. So I'm going to call this 0. I know sea level happens at 0. Now remember, 0 is not positive or negative, it's neutral. But if I talk about the first thing they mentioned, this helicopter, it says that it is above sea level, 105 meters, 155 meters. So which way would I move for above? Or which way would you look to see a helicopter flying? I certainly hope you'd be looking up in the air. So we're going to head upwards towards the top of our number line, and we're going to call this 155 meters. So we'll put a line and we'll call this 155. Notice I'm going to keep it positive because we're heading upwards. And positive numbers on a number line that is vertical head towards the top. And in case I have to remove my picture in a minute, I'll write helicopter here just in case. If you want to draw yourself a helicopter, go for it. Just a quick sketch, please. If we go back to our word problem, there's more decoding to do. Now we have a flock of birds that's flying 80 meters below the helicopter. Ooh, this is important. There are birds, and where are they? 80 meters below. Below, that sounds like a negative, but that sure is strange. Have you ever seen a flock of birds flying underwater below? Oh, that would be below sea level. And I don't think it said that. That wouldn't make much sense. So let's go back and think about it. It actually says below the helicopter. Oh, this is trickier than I thought. We're not moving underwater at all. That's a good thing for the birds. We're just moving down from the helicopter. Now it says how far down we're moving from the helicopter. It says 80 meters below. So if I think of a negative, I'm moving down. I am taking something away. So I'm going to draw a line here. And I'm going to say this is the birds. I'm going to keep a little space here for a second because I'm not real sure where they're located at. But I do know that they're 80 meters below or less than the helicopter. So you might over here draw yourself a little bracket and show that this is 80 meters difference. All right, we've plotted our helicopter and our birds. Oh my, what comes next? Well, if you go back to your word problem, I know it's tiny for you to see here, but hopefully you have this problem in front of you. It says we have a submarine and it is 185 meters below sea level. Oh, this is important. It's a submarine. And it says it's 185 meters below. Below usually means a negative, but a minute ago it didn't, so we should be careful. Would you like to see a helicopter flying in the air? Does that make much sense? Should it be below maybe the helicopter? This is a submarine, by the way. Should it be below the helicopter, below the birds? Or should it be below sea level? Let's go back and make sense of this. It does say below sea level. That really means it's a negative. I hope that I see a submarine in the water, not necessarily flying above my head. That'd be scary. So I know I need to move below 0. I'm heading towards the negatives. So if we tried to move this a little bit here, how far down would I go? Well, it says it's negative 185. That's quite a ways. So I'm going to move quite a ways down this number line, and I'm going to give it a little mark. I'm going to write 185, and I'm going to write it's a submarine in case my pictures get moved around. But that wouldn't make much sense. Do positive numbers happen on the top of my number line and on the bottom of my number line when I'm working vertically? No. Positives are to the top and negatives are to the bottom. So down here I'm heading towards a negative. This really should say a negative 185. Oh, that's right. In the word problem, that word below might mean a negative, and it did this time because it's below sea level. All right, we have our helicopter, our birds, and a submarine. Oh my, let's read on. Ooh, a group of divers are diving along a reef at 162 meters above the submarine. Oh, okay, we have divers. Here come our divers, and it says that they are 162 meters above. Oh, above usually means positive. This is great. Usually positives mean I move to the top side of my number line or above 0. Have you ever seen a diver in scuba gear flying in the air? Me neither. I think we better go back and take a look at that problem again. Actually, it says 162 meters above the submarine. Oh, it's not above sea level. It's above the submarine. That's a different matter. So above the submarine means something a little bit different. It means that it could be somewhere in the water. That would make more sense for some scuba divers, right? Some divers checking out the reef. So I want to move downwards, and I want to head somewhere towards the negatives, I know. Well, it says that it's 162 meters above the submarine. He's got to be somewhere here in the water. So I'm going to think 162 is almost 185. So it's quite a difference between the two. I'm thinking we might be somewhere up here. I'm going to draw a line and call this my divers. And I'll put my diver here for a minute. But keep this in mind, I don't really know his location yet. What I know is the difference here, or the distance between submarine and divers, is 162 meters. Our number line is really set. We're ready to do some answering of the different parts of this question. So the first critical piece was really setting this up, trying to get these different pieces in the right locations, and there was a little trick. Sometimes it didn't say above sea level. Sometimes it said above the submarine. And sometimes it didn't say below sea level. Sometimes it said below a helicopter. All right, let's take a look at part A. What is the vertical distance between the helicopter and the submarine? Oh, that really means that I'm moving from the helicopter way here at the top all the way down here to the submarine. And that is quite a distance. In fact, I'm talking about starting on the positive end of my number line and moving all the way down here to a negative. This is part A, vertical distance. How am I going to find that? If you remember back to our math map, I have two numbers on opposite sides of 0. And when that happens, I want to take their absolute values and add them. I want to find a total distance. So total distance is really what I'm thinking. I'm going to have to add. Well, I don't want to be adding negatives today. I really don't. That sounds difficult. So I'm going to think about distance being positive. I'm going to use absolute value bars. Oops, I just wrote the wrong numbers too. So let's try that again. I need the absolute value of the helicopter. 155 meters, the absolute value or the distance from 0. And I need to add that to the absolute value of my submarine. If you look over here, he's located at a negative 185. All right, so before I can add these, I have some math to do. I need to think about their distance from 0. Well, remember the numbers really keep the same value. This is how many jumps it would take to get to 155 on my number line. If I look at a negative 185, I know it's jumping the other way from my 0, but I still know that distance is always positive. I'm going to have to jump a total of 185 jumps. That's a positive number also. I'm really ready to add these up. So whatever 155 plus 185 is. So over here, 185 and 155. Let's do some quick addition. 5 plus 5 is 10. We'll regroup. 8 and 5 is 13 plus 1 more is 14, and I'll regroup. Let's see here, 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. It looks like we get 340. Now be careful. They gave me words. We better give them words back. What is the vertical distance between the helicopter and the submarine? 340 what? Chihuahuas? Cheese sticks. No, it looks like we're measuring distance. Distance could be measured in maybe feet, miles, inches. Oh, if I go back to the problem, everything's measured in meters. 155 meters, 80 meters, meters. Looks like meters would be an acceptable label. And maybe you want to get fancy and you want to say the vertical distance between the helicopter and submarine is 340 meters. That would be pretty awesome too. Let's take a look at part B. I'm having trouble getting this focused for you. So again, I hope you have this worksheet in front of you. It says, how far below sea level are the divers? Oh, remember they were above the submarine, but we never really figured out their location. How can we figure out where those divers are located? We know that they were compared to the submarine. I started at a negative 185, and then it said to move 162 meters away, so I did. Well, I know I'm still in a negative spot, but I have to figure out how far away that went. So what I could do here is I could take maybe the absolute value of these two numbers, and I could do some comparing. They're on the same side of the number line, so when I take their absolute values, I'm not going to add. I'll have to do something different. When two numbers are on the same side of 0, we don't add, we subtract. And again, that's what that math map was for. When we looked at that Hawk math map, that was kind of our helpful hint. So let's take a look at this. How far away is negative 185 on the number line? It's 185 jumps, of course. How far away is 162 from, oops, I didn't really have to do absolute value of that, did I? We already knew that it was a distance. It was already 162. Well, it won't hurt anyway, will it? It's already positive, so we'll take away 162. Let's go ahead and do a quick subtraction off to the side. Take away 162. 5 take away 2 is 3. 8 tens take away 6 tens leaves us with 2 tens, and 1 take away 1 is 0. Looks like I get an answer of 23. 23 what? How far below sea level? How far is kind of a hint. They're talking about a distance again. And what are we measuring in? Meters. Bare minimum, this is an okay answer. Could you make it fancier? Could you tell me the divers are 23 meters below sea level? Absolutely. And actually, to be very honest, because they're below, I might have to use a negative 23 so that you understand they're below. Or, kind of out of room here, we could say 23 meters and use the word below sea level so that we understand it's a negative amount. That one's a little bit tricky. We don't want those divers in the air, so we either have to use the word below or a negative symbol. Let's talk about part C. How far above the divers is the flock of birds? Oh, and by the way, we forgot to fill in our divers over here, didn't we? We got a negative 23 for their location on the number line. All right, so part C. And actually, this was part B over here, if we want to kind of label it part B. How far above the divers is the flock of birds? Well, now I'm going from birds to divers, and this is part C. Well, how would I find that? If you notice, First of all, I might need to find out a number that goes with my birds. How far above the divers is the flock of birds? I don't have a number here, do I? But I bet I could find it. Weren't the birds being compared to the helicopter a little bit ago? In the original problem, they told me that the birds were not below sea level, but below the helicopter by 80 meters. I think we need to do a subtraction to first find where the birds are located. So we'll take the helicopter and his distance of 155, and we're going to take away the 80 meters. They said that it was 80 meters below where I would find those birds. And again, I don't really need the absolute value of that. It already was a distance. So last time I accidentally showed those symbols. It didn't hurt anything, but we don't need to do that this time. Well, let's simplify a little bit. How far away is 155, or that helicopter, from zero, or from sea level? It's 155 intervals or jumps. Let's take away 80 from that and see what we get. Well, off to the side, I might have to do something like this. Stack them up and show the algorithm it's called. What's 5 take away 0? 5. 5 take away 8 is difficult to do without a little bit of a regroup here. But 15 take away 8 can happen. You would get 7. And 0 take away 0, 0. Looks like I get an answer of 75. Now be careful, this is actually the location of the birds, right? So I'm thinking of the birds and their location first. Birds, location, and actually they own the location, so we'll give them an apostrophe. We'll think about ELA while we do our math today. So over here, I figured out the birds are over here at 75. That is a piece of the puzzle, but that's not a final answer. Because we're comparing the divers to the flock of birds, we want to find their distance. Well, I have a positive 75 and a negative 23, and if you remember, I have 2 points on the opposite side of 0. Birds, divers. And to get there, I'm going to have to take the distance to the birds and add it to the distance to the divers. I have 2 distances, or 2 absolute values to combine. I'm not too happy because I'm really running out of space here, so what can we do? Try to slide over my number line a little bit, maybe? You may need extra paper for this assignment, it's looking like. So I didn't plan that ahead, did I? Let's talk about the distance to the birds, the distance to 75, and the distance to the divers, the distance to negative 23. If I can find these distances, I can add them together to find the total distance, the distance from the birds to the divers. Well, 75 is 75 units away from 0 or sea level. Negative 23 is 23 units away, and if I were to combine them, I'd have a total distance, so I really want to add these together. Well, off to the side, I could be thinking 75 plus 23 in an algorithm. 5 plus 3 in the ones place gets me 8. 7 plus 2 in the tens place gets me 9. I have 98. There we go. I found their distance. There's 98 meters between the birds and my divers. 98 meters. Notice I'm trying to box in my answers because there's an awful lot of work happening here and we want to be able to find your final answer. All right, this problem's getting better. We're getting there. Part D, which is closer to sea level, the divers or the birds? By how many meters? Sounds like I'm comparing 2 things and I'm looking for the closer number. Divers to birds. So let's talk about divers and compare them to birds. Thinking about an inequality here. So what absolute value could I use for the divers? The absolute value of negative 23. I see them over here on my number line. What absolute value could we use for the birds? Well, how far away were they? Let's see. However many jumps it takes to get to 75. Let's think about absolute value. Well, negative 23 is 23 jumps away from 0. 75 is 75 jumps or intervals away from 0. So if I wanted to make this true, 23 would be less than or greater than 75. Hopefully you'd say 23 is less than. And if that's true, this inequality symbol would also be true. And this inequality symbol would also be true. Notice everything on the left had to do with my divers and everything on the right had to do with my birds. So what does that mean? Which is closer? Well, is closer the bigger number or the smaller number? Is it the least or the greatest? It's the lesser number, of course. So if you take a look, no matter where I look, the less than is really pointing towards my divers and the numbers that go with them or represent them. So we know divers are closer to sea level. But, oops, no comma needed, by blank meters. There were 2 parts here. Notice that there were 2 question marks. Sometimes that's a big clue to me that there's a part A and a part B. So part A is who was closer? It was the divers. Part B is by how many meters? How would I figure that out? Well, I know both their distances. Don't I want to compare them? I want to say by how many more would it take, or how many less does it take to get to one or the other? So this is really an act of subtraction. So 5 take away 3 in the ones place is 2. 7 tens take away 2 tens leaves me with 5 tens. 52 meters. The divers are closer to sea level. And by how much? 52 meters. Final answer. I think we have another one similar to that in this next question. So let's go there now with part E. Which is closer to the divers? Ooh, closer to the divers, not closer to sea level. Closer to the divers. This is kind of important. Closer to the divers. The helicopter or the submarine? There's a question mark here. This is part A. By how many meters? There's a question mark here. There's a part B. All right, so I'm starting at my divers over here. And I might try to use a different color just so you can see it. I'm going from divers to the first thing it asks, helicopter. So divers to helicopter. I guess I'm going to kind of right over top of this. We're getting near the end of this problem anyway. Okay, so I want to find this distance. And I want to compare it to my divers to the second thing they asked, submarine. So I'm going to kind of draw myself a mark here. Divers to submarine. And I'll put a question mark here. I want to compare these. And this again is for part E. So I could put an E next to this if I wanted to. Part E has to do with all this blue writing over here. So how would I do that? Well, first I need to find the distance of my divers to the helicopter. And notice my divers are on the opposite side of the number line, or of 0, right, from the helicopter. One is a positive number, one is a negative number. So when that happens, I have to combine the numbers or the distances. So I'm going to think over here, helicopter to divers. That really means helicopter distance, the 155, added to the diver distance, which is really the distance to negative 23. Well, we know the absolute value of 155 is 155, and the absolute value of negative 23 really means 23 jumps away. And remember, we're adding these because we're trying to find a total distance, going from the negatives to the positives. So I can picture this in my head. 3 ones plus 5 ones gets me 8 ones. 2 tens plus 5 tens gets me 7 tens. And 1 in the hundreds place. Looks like they're 178 meters away from each other. But that is just my helicopter to my divers. Next I need to compare my divers, because it says we're comparing both of them, the distance to divers to the submarine. So let's go divers to submarine. Well, those divers, remember, they're at negative 23. I kind of have that one memorized. And we're going to the submarine, so let's see here. Submarine is over here at a negative 185. And because they're on the same side of the number line, I'd really want to do a subtraction. I see a problem here. I hope you see it too. In a minute, when I find the absolute value, it's going to be very difficult if I start at 23 to take away 185. We ran into this in a problem in the classroom the other day. So could I still find their distance and just kind of turn this around? Could I start at the submarine and go to the divers? Could I treat it that way? Yeah, that might be a good idea. So maybe I will cross this out and we'll try again. I'll start at the submarine and go to the divers. It still should be the same distance. It just might help me to see it without getting into negative numbers too much. So the submarine is located at a negative 185, and the divers were still at that negative 23. Because they're on the same side of the number line, they're both at that negative side of my number line, I'm going to subtract. All right, well, the distance of negative 185 is 185. The distance of negative 23 is a positive 23, because remember, distance is always positive. Well, I was going to subtract these values because they were at the same side or on the same side of my number line. So let's give it a try. 5 ones take away 3 ones gets me 2 ones. 8 5, so that's not right. 8 tens take away 2 tens is actually 6 tens. 100 take away nothing is 100. All right, so helicopters to divers will get me 178 meters. Submarines to divers will get me 162 meters. who is closer to the divers? Meaning, which is the smaller number? Well, I know 162 is smaller, so let's go back to our work and say, who was that? Who's closer to the divers? Well, the D was divers. Who went with it? The S was for submarine. The submarine is closer to the divers. But be careful, there was a part B. So closer by how many meters? How would I find that? Just like last time, if I'm comparing, I'm trying to find the difference between things. So I'm really doing a subtraction. Just like on part D, we had to subtract the different distances I found. Well, let's take that 178 and take away the 162. 8 take away 2 is 6. 7 take away 6 is 1. 1 take away 1 is 0. Looks like the submarine is closer, but only by 16 meters. Closer to the divers. That kind of makes sense to me. You would expect maybe something in the water to be closer than something in the air. This last one, part F, I think gets a little bit challenging too. So the grand finale. Are you ready? Order the helicopter, birds, divers, and submarine from the closest to sea level to the farthest. Well, at least we're talking about to sea level. That at least means absolute value. And I have helicopters, birds, divers, and submarines. Oh mine. Oh my. So let's grab those different pieces. My helicopter. All right, I'm going to record his absolute value here. Remember, he was at 155 meters above sea level. So his absolute value, or his distance, would be 155. 155 jumps away from 0 on the number line. All right, helicopter set. Who could we work with next? Oh, my lights went out. Sorry, I have to flash my arms around here. All right, how about the birds? Birds over on our number line. We marked them over here. What number did we say they were at? They were located at 75 meters. So if we can find the absolute value of 75, we can do some comparison in a second, or order these. Well, 75 is actually 75 jumps away from 0. So here I have my helicopter and my birds all set with absolute value. All right, well, I see a diver over here. Notice where he was located? He was at a negative 23, which really means I want to find his distance. How far away is that from 0? Just 23 jumps. 23 jumps. And I don't know if we need this problem here a whole lot anymore, so I'll slide that out of the way for a minute. Okay, and I also have my submarine. Go back to your number line. Where was he located? Negative 185. So we want to find his distance from 0. Remember, it talked about who is closest or farthest. So it's talking about distance. That's a big hint. Closest or farthest. Easy for me to say. How far away is negative 185 from 0? Well, remember, it ends up being a positive number of jumps. 185. All right, well, it's kind of nice that I made these into like little sorting pieces, because now I can rearrange them any way I want. I want to figure out how to go from closest to farthest. So closest would be the smallest number. Well, my choices are 155, 75, 23, or 185. If you look at those, 23 would be the smallest. So it sounds like I need to put my divers first. Who's going to come next? Well, we're going from least to greatest, closest to farthest. So 155 is pretty big, 185 is even larger. 75. 75 has to come next. Divers are closest, birds are next. So it's kind of like first place, second place. Who comes in third? The next number that would be closest to 0 or sea level would be 155. 155 is smaller than 185. So my helicopter comes next. Last but not least, the farthest number should have the greatest distance, and it sure does. 185 is greater than any of these. So this would be my answer in order. I really want to write in word form. Divers, birds, helicopter, and submarine are in order from closest to farthest on the number line. Okay, we could write that in order for you if you like. Divers, birds, helicopter, and submarine are in order from closest to farthest. Notice I'm kind of stealing their words. That's okay to do, especially when you want to restate the question. From sea level. Sometimes when I get stuck, I try to think of another way to visualize it. So if sometimes you want to draw yourself little pieces that you can kind of shuffle around and play with, I do think that sometimes I find that helpful. So that's kind of why I tried that strategy with you today. Don't be afraid to kind of think outside the box. If there's some strategy that might work for you, give it a try. So just another way of thinking today. This concludes lesson 2.2, absolute value. And oh my, this vertical number line was definitely challenging. So don't be scared if you didn't get all the way there without some help from my video or some help in the classroom or some help from a friend. That's to be expected at this point. Only a few of us are going to be able to handle all those steps independently as we're just starting out the school year. And as time goes on, I hope that your thinking skills start to develop and kind of grow so that you'll start to show a little more independence with these pieces. Remember, on our test, if you see something like this and it's super challenging to you, try some pieces of it. Try something, because we can give you partial credit as you kind of move in that direction.